All right, everybody, it's Michael Shermer, and it's time for another episode of The Michael Shermer Show. I got a special guest for you today. It's the great Charles Murray, policy analyst educated at Harvard and MIT, and is presently the Hayek Emeritus Scholar at the American Enterprise Institute. He first came to national attention in 1984 with the publication of his book, Losing Ground, American Social Policy, 1950 to 1980. Which changed the national conversation about the so-called war on poverty and its aftermath. In 1994, his best-selling book, The Bell Curve, co-authored with Richard Herrnstein, argued that the increasing role of intelligence over the 20th century was transforming America's social structure. By the way, Charles, we covered that in Skeptic. Here's the cover story of 1994 Skeptic magazine. I had a hard time finding anybody to defend it. I mean, to make the case for you. I finally got Vince Sarich at UC Berkeley because he was pretty fearless about being criticized.
And he was very competent to defend it, too.
Oh, yeah. But everybody else, oh boy, they didn't want to touch it, except for the critics. Anyway, continuing. In 2012, Charles wrote Coming Apart, documenting the growing divide between a new lower class and a new upper class that foreshadowed the political polarization of the 2016 election. His other books include In Pursuit, Human Accomplishment in 2003. I read that one. Human Diversity in 2020. I also read that one. Facing Reality. I didn't read that one, but the new one I just read twice, Taking Religion Seriously. There it is. Charles, nice short book. Thank you very much.
Yes,
I just read this article yesterday in the Free Press about how no one reads long books anymore and literacy rates are declining.
Yeah. I don't think I could make a living doing what I've done in the next few decades.
Yeah, it's astonishing. But there's something else interesting going on here I wanted to just get your opinion on as a sociologist that tracks this sort of thing. There's a slew of books. Here you are, 82-year-old, lifelong atheist, now found God. Okay, you're not the only one, right? You probably read Jonathan Rauch's book, Cross Purposes. He didn't become religious, but he's arguing that religion in general and Christianity, the Judeo-Christian worldview is good for democracy, right?
That's Jonathan Haidt's position too, right?
Yes, that's right. Yeah. Also short, right? Also short is Sebastian Junger's In My Time of Dying about his near-death experience, which he had a conversation with his father after the dad was dead. Michael Egnor's The Immortal Mind. He's a neurologist that talks about a lot of the stuff you discussed in your book, about the mind existing separate from the brain. I don't know if you know Samuel Wilkinson, his book Purpose. He's a Mormon, but basically he uses evolutionary theory to explain pretty much the kinds of things you talk about there, the evolution of morality and purpose and meaning in life and so on. And then there's this beast. Oh my God, these guys are coming on the show in a couple of weeks, so I have to finish reading this 600-page tome, God, the Science, and the Evidence. Apparently it sold 400,000 copies in France and now has just been translated into English. And then, Charles, this is so funny. 5 minutes ago, I went to the mailbox here at the office and I got this galley proof of Jesse Baring's book called The Incredible Afterlives of Dr. Stevenson. One scientist's epic quest for evidence of reincarnation, apparitions, poltergeists, and other matters of the soul. Jesse, also a lifelong atheist. A researcher whose own trailblazing work on the psychology of afterlife beliefs had led him to believe it was all an illusion, is now forced to rethink his own worldview. How about that?
I hate it when the interviewer is better read than I am, and that's the case.
But what is going on here? What do you think is going on here?
You left out Ross Douthat. Ross Douthat's Belief.
Ross Douthat, yes, Believe, Why Everyone Should Be Religious. Yeah. Yes, I have that book here. And also, apparently, Ayaan Hirsi Ali has a book coming about her conversion. What is going on here, do you think?
I think it's a virus of some kind, probably.
No, come on. How about a fifth grade awakening?
Well, actually, I do have a view of what's going on. I expressed it recently. Michael, to me, I kind of look at the 20th century as the adolescence of Western intellectuals. And I think I first expressed this actually way back in 2003 in Human Accomplishment, that the Enlightenment was wonderful in many ways, but we sort of threw out the baby with the bathwater. reason and evidence were seen as the only legitimate ways in which we can inquire into the world. And anything of the supernatural was sort of out of bounds by definition. We can get into this later, but I liked William James's use of the word scientism to describe what went on. And over the course of the 20th century, you had a whole bunch of things that we found. Again, we'll be going into this, but starting with the 1920s, when, to the dismay of a lot of people, it turned out that the scientific consensus on the origin of the universe sounds like a gloss on Genesis. Let there be light. But by the end of the 20th century, I think there was something similar to growing out of adolescence, that we had absorbed the good things from the Enlightenment, and in the 21st century, more and more of us have been saying, well, we've had blinkers on, and our parents aren't as stupid as we thought they were. That's the essence of
it. Nice, yeah. Yeah, it could be, there's been this prediction since the turn of the 20th century that religion would decline. And that never happened in America really until maybe the last 15 years or so. And now those numbers seem to be flat. The declining numbers seem to be flattening out and maybe going back up.
But they've still gone way, way down.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're talking about church attendance and affiliation and all that, yeah. I'm speaking specifically of the intellectuals.
Right. Yeah. Well, you have that quote, I think, from your wife about, there's no need to believe these silly things anymore. But
yeah. So I quote my wife a lot in this book.
Yeah, I love that.
We went to college, and she's one who came up to, I went to college, and I learned that smart people don't believe that stuff anymore.
That's what it is, yeah. Right.
Yeah, but it was the same with me. I got to Harvard from Iowa, small town in Iowa, and I didn't take any courses on religion, but the zeitgeist was quite clear. My professors weren't religious, as far as I could tell. None of my friends was religious. When religion came up, it was sort of a subject of either indifference or derision or amusement. And that's just what smart people thought. And I unreflectively bought into that.
So it was your sense at Harvard that the professors weren't anti-religious. They just didn't discuss it. It was just not relevant.
Yeah. The zeitgeist did not have to include. They had no need of that hypothesis, as Laplace said about why he didn't have God in his book about the celestial mechanics. Yeah, it was. And, I was never an atheist, really. I called myself an agnostic all along, and I always respected religion. And I'm one of those who for a long time has thought that religion plays an extremely important social role in terms of holding societies together. I think I was pretty close to the founders, really, in my views, which was I personally did not believe in the divinity of Christ or any of the rest of it theologically, but I thought that a free society needs to have, first of all, a population that governs itself, literally governs themselves as individuals, and that religion is a big, big help in doing that. And virtually all the founders said that one way or the other.
Right. So we don't have the long arm of the law to reach out to every town and village in the country. So it would be good if people had an internal moral compass so we don't have to police them.
Yeah.
That's the idea. Yeah. Yeah, though we have to be careful not to, Dan Dennett calls this belief in belief. I don't believe, but I believe in that believing is good for most people. But then it segs into kind of a condescending, it's for the little people, right? The little people need religion, but we intellectuals don't need that.
There is an element of all the many ways in which intellectuals have condescended. That's one of the lead ones.
Another one, by the way, just tangentially to your bell curve is, in academics, just disparage your book and the idea of IQ, but they constantly talk about how smart they are.
I know. Once again, I got to quote my wife. She said, when professors are putting on their makeup in the morning or shaving, they aren't thinking about their publications compared to their colleagues, they're thinking about how smart they are compared to their colleagues.
Exactly.
I think that's accurate.
Yeah.
You want a really silly example of this?
Yeah.
But I can tell it because it makes me sound foolish. My wife and I met as adults in 1981. Our parents have been good friends as kids. She was 6 years younger, so I didn't pay any attention to her then. But we re-met as adults, and she was visiting me in Washington, and we were eating dinner in my apartment. This is the second day we've known, and we getting into conversations about our past and so forth. Guess what came up? Test scores. And in the course of this, Catherine mentions, she said, I guess the GRE had come up. And she said, yeah, I got 811 on the GRE. And I said, probably condescendingly, well, actually, the range is 200 to 800. And I can still remember bringing a fork to her mouth with another bite of food, saying, they send you a special letter.
That's really funny.
But here you have two people. What do they find to talk about upon first getting back together again? They sooner or later get around to ways in which they can reveal how smart they are.
Yeah. That was similar in my experience in the opposite direction, actually. When I was at Pepperdine University, which is Church of Christ school, everybody was Christian. It was just kind of a given. It wasn't forced on anybody, but, it's just that's what we all believed. I took courses in the Old Testament, the New Testament, and the writings. I took an entire course in C.S. Lewis. And Tony Ash taught that course. It was great. We read everything he wrote, since you're a fan of.
There are worse ways to spend a semester than reading C.S. Lewis.
Oh, yeah. Such a good writer. Although the sci-fi trilogy was not nearly as good as the Chronicles of Narnia, I thought. I don't know if you tried to get through those.
I have not tried to get into that one.
I don't recommend it. But then when I went to graduate school, just Cal State Fullerton, and no one was religious, and it just didn't come up. And I thought, that's really interesting. It's just trying to explain things. We used to go to, after that course in evolution, Monday night, 7 to 10, we would then head down to the local pub in Fullerton, the 301 Club, as it was called, and the professor would meet there with all the students, which, people don't do this anymore, but I guess, yeah. And then we would talk about all these things, and the God question, I mean, it never came up as an explanation. It's just like, well, that's not an explanation, so what else do we have?
Yep.
So... But before we get into the details of, your arguments, let's talk about belief for a minute. Like when you say, I believe now in God or religion or whatever, what do you mean by that? So this is an example that this guy, Neil Van Leeuwen, psychologist, wrote a book on religion. And when the pastor says the church has a parking lot behind it, anybody can go check for themselves. When the pastor says God is 3 in 1, Father, Son, and Holy Ghost, how are they supposed to check that? I mean, they either believe it or they don't. You're a Unitarian or you're a Trinitarian, you accept it or you don't. And that's a matter of faith. So that kind of use of the word belief has different meanings, and depending on what you're talking about. So how do you use it when you say, I believe now?
I deliberately avoided saying I have faith in anything anywhere in the book, because what I did acquire were beliefs. And those beliefs, in many cases, are like so many other things that I think probabilistically. So that, for example, we'll get back to this later, but I think that an afterlife is likely, which I did not used to think. But notice I used the word likely, and I'm not putting any bets down on it. And I found that a belief is when you have looked at evidence and you think the balance tilts significantly toward one side or the other. And that becomes a qualified belief. And there are very few things that I am sure of. And they have almost none of them have much to do with religion. There are a variety of things about IQ that I believe firmly. I'm satisfied that we've gotten the answer to it. But that's a subset. So we all have beliefs, but I think all of us hold different beliefs with different levels of confidence.
So you're Bayesian in that sense, and so if you had to put a number between 1 and 99%, let's say on the afterlife, roughly where would you put it?
Just greater than 50.
Greater than 50, okay. Right.
Yeah. Greater than 50.
Preponderance of evidence, which is...
Preponderance, but not beyond a reasonable
50%
doubt.
plus a feather.
That's right.
As they say. Yeah, interesting. Okay. So then that does make any kind of empirical claims then relevant because, we talk about NDEs or terminal lucidity or the fine-tuning or whatever. You can use those arguments to nudge the scale slightly one way or the other.
Oh, I will give you an example of that. A academic, I don't know where he's affiliated, but on X today, I'm on social media X, and he has published a piece, I think in Psychology Today, about arguing with me about the interpretation of terminal lucidity. And it is a model of how this kind of debate should be carried on. He doesn't call me any names. He doesn't bring my intelligence or good faith into question. On the contrary, he treats my position respectfully, and he brings up a variety of reasons for me to qualify my confidence. And so when I responded to it online, I praised him for what a model it was. And I also said, if there's a paperback version of taking religion seriously, I'm going to do a few tweaks of the language there. I'm not going to withdraw everything, but I'm going to tweak it to take into account some very interesting possibilities that he raised.
That wasn't Ariel Zelenico Johnston, was it?
Was it what?
Well, the person you were engaging with, there's a neuroscientist named Ariel Zelenikov Johnston, who just posted an article on terminal lucidity yesterday.
It must be him.
I bet it is him. Yeah.
Yeah.
I have notes from that because it's so good. It doesn't counter what you're saying. It's just some other possible explanations.
Exactly.
Which I think is relevant. Okay, but before we get into those details, just two more points on belief. So there's Martin Gardner. You probably know Martin. He was the longtime Scientific American columnist before I had the job. But he's one of the founders of the modern skeptical movement with the Amazing Randy and Isaac Asimov, Carl Sagan, Paul Kurtz, and so on. And it came to light in the late 80s, early 90s that he was a believer in God. And, Randy and these guys are like, what? Martin Gardner, you're the greatest debunker of all time, So here's how he explained it. I interviewed him about this in Skeptic. People think that if you don't believe an Uri Geller can bend spoons, then you must be an atheist. But I think these are two different things. I call myself a philosophical theist in the tradition of Immanuel Kant, Charles Peirce, William James, and especially Miguel Unamuno, one of my favorite philosophers. As a fideist, I don't think there are any arguments that prove the existence of God or the immortality of the soul. Even more than that, I agree with Unamuno that the atheists have better arguments, but only slightly better. So it's a case of quixotic emotional belief that really is against the evidence and against the odds. But continuing with William James's The Will to Believe, if you have strong emotional reasons for a metaphysical belief, and it is not strongly contradicted by science or logical reasons, then you have a right to make the leap of faith if it provides sufficient satisfaction. To me, it's an emotional thing. Anyway, I just want to get your thoughts on fideism, pragmatic truths, that kind of thing.
I think that's a lovely way of expressing it. And he goes farther than I would. Leaps of faith still bother me a lot. And it's one of the reasons that my way of going about religion is inferior to Catherine's way. I might as well start using her name since she'll come up again.
Oh, yeah.
Catherine is my wife. And her way is she thinks a great deal of the material I have in the book is beside the point, especially the historicity of the Bible and a variety of other things, that she is interested in the human condition and contemplative prayer and trying to penetrate to the heart of the spiritual aspects of this. And I don't have a good temperament for that. So I really I probably have a harder time making the leap of faith than I should. And so when you were reading that by Gardner, who's I'm familiar with and impressed with, I thought maybe that's a more sensible way of thinking about it than the way I do.
Maybe. I'll continue with what he said here.
Yeah.
If you do believe in a personal God, it is in an analogical sense. So I sometimes like to call myself a theological positivist because I agree completely with Rudolf Carnap that metaphysical questions are meaningless. If you can't get at it by logic or by science, you really can't say anything at all about the question. If you ask me for details about the nature of God, I would have to answer, I don't know. The kind of God I believe in is so completely transcendent and so wholly other that you really can't say anything about God's nature. To ask, for example, whether God is inside or outside of time, I have no idea what this means or how to reply to it. I can understand arguments saying he is in time, coming from process theologians. On the other hand, I can understand the arguments that place God completely outside of time, in some sort of realm in which time has no meaning. But these are metaphysical arguments, and Carnap would say they are meaningless questions, and I would have to agree with that.
Well, I'm on board with a lot of that. My section on the importance of not anthropomorphizing God is directly relevant to that. I just start from the assumption that any God worthy of the name is utterly unknowable to me. And I use the analogy of my dog. And I have a dog that's mostly border collie, so I have a smart dog. But nonetheless, that smart dog knows a few things about me, but has no idea who I am, has no idea what I'm doing when I'm sitting in front of this computer screen. And it's impossible for him to. So, well, you take that analogy, and I guess in a way, it feeds into Gardner's talking about leap of faith. God, if God exists, anything we say about what God can and can't do, grounded in human terms, is off the mark. And that includes the reasons for saying there can't be a personal God because we live in a universe of billions of galaxies, and how could God possibly be concerned with creatures clinging to the surface of this nondescript little planet? That for a long time was persuasive to me against a personal God until when I realized, no, you are saying it would be impossible for you to deal with a universe of billions of galaxies, not necessarily for God.
Yeah, so, and would you apply that then to the problem of evil and the Odyssey and why bad things happen to good people? It's just, you're asking God to be like us and stop wars or be nice or heal people.
I'll tell you something. I know that the problem of good and evil and why does God permit bad things to happen is of central concern to lots and lots of people. I know people who say that they lost their faith because of the evil that God permits. And so I understand how widespread that is, and I've never gotten it. To me, I try to imagine living a human life in a world in which evil could not exist, and it just seems like a contradiction in terms that it takes away all agency, it takes away all the ways in which living a human life can give you satisfaction. And so that God does not prevent evil from happening, I've just always said, well, of course he doesn't prevent that. I don't, it's one of those cases where I have a hard time understanding why some people think differently. I just know that they do.
Well, they would like an intervention. Like they don't want Hitler to have gotten away with it.
Yeah.
Right? Or, it's not fair that, my wife got cancer and died and this other person got healed. How come?
Yeah.
Well, maybe that's not the kind of question you can ask a transcendent, a truly omniscient being, omnipotent being, something like that. We're still treating God in that sense like it's just a super advanced AI or a genetic engineer that can reach in and tune the genetics of the tumor and make it go away.
I will say that I do get really irritated with people who oftentimes on X, who deride people who believe in God and then have a sentence which indicates that to believe in God is to believe in this grandfather in the sky. No, actually, it's a little more sophisticated than that.
Yeah. Okay, last point on the on belief. I think about these different kinds of truths or beliefs, empirical, scientific, objective truths versus subjective, internal, just preferences or whatever. But then there's like mythical truths or literary truths. The analogy I make is, like we get people that write to Skeptic, like I can explain the party in the Red Sea. It was a meteor strike, or it was an earthquake, or Jesus didn't really die on the cross. He was in a coma, and then they took him off, and then he was in this cold tomb, and then they whisked him off to France, and he married Mary Magdalene and went full Dan Brown here and had children, whatever. But to me, they're missing the point of the story. Is not, did Jonah really live 3 days in a great fish or a whale? You're missing the point of the story. It's a story. I mean, were there really 4 brothers Karamazov in Dostoevsky's great novel? Was there really a Middle Earth in J.R.R. Tolkien's Lord of the Rings? That is there really a 9 3/4 railroad platform in Harry Potter? Why would anybody even ask that? They're novels. They're stories that have a deeper literary truth that we get from the great novels, which is what makes great novels great. And to ask that it really happened is to miss the point. You see where I'm going with that with biblical stories.
And I have no objection to it, except the great interesting question in the case of my evolving belief, insofar as I call myself a Christian, which I do now, but I call I'm not a doctrinaire Christian in many ways. And one of the ways in which I have shifted is I am more convinced in the past that the meaning of the life of Jesus of Nazareth is not just as a story in the sense that Jonah's a story, but that it has a grounding in historical truth that I need to take seriously. So I've shifted in that respect.
Interesting. So that's what Paul said, right? That if Christ is not risen literally from the dead, then we shouldn't be Christians.
Well, now you're pushing me even further. There are a variety of people who I think have a very persuasive take on that. For me, there's a book. It's written by a man. His last name is Polkinghorne. I cited in the book, and I can't remember the title.
I read that book. Yeah, what was that?
Yeah, okay. And what makes it interesting is this guy was
The Faith of a Physicist.
Faith of a physicist,
Yeah.
and he was a mathematical theoretical physicist at Oxford for many years before he left Oxford and became an ordained Anglican priest. And he takes in that book the entire Nicene Creed, and he takes each phrase and he discusses how he thinks of it. And of course, I was very interested when he gets to the end of the Nicene Creed, and it's Jesus died and came back, was resurrected 3 days later. And he goes through, not in great detail, but through some of the empirical arguments that you can bring to bear on that. And he finally says something to the effect that, well, actually, give me just a second here, because I think this is it's a very nice passage, and
I think it's in your final.
Yeah, see, I've just gotten it now. It's the Faith of a Physicist, and here's what he says about the resurrection: the only explanation which is commensurate with the phenomena is that Jesus rose from the dead in such a fashion, whatever that may be, that it is true to say that he is alive today, glorified and exalted, but still continuously related to him in a mysterious but real way with the historical figure who lived and died in first century Palestine. So he has given himself a variety of outs there, particularly with whatever that may be. And he goes through some of the alternatives. But his statement about him still being continuously related in a mysterious but real way, I can go along with that. Whereas I'm on a kind of a knife edge when it comes to the reality of the physical resurrection. I think David Brooks has said the same thing, that he goes back and forth on that, and I still go back and forth.
Well, so I sent you that video clip. I don't know if you had a chance to watch it of Ben Shapiro when I was on a show, and I asked him, how come you don't accept the resurrection of Jesus and Jesus is the Messiah as a Jew? And, he gave his answer. Basically, that's not what Jews believe. They don't believe God can come down and become human form. That's not what we think of as a Messiah, the Savior. It's a political figure, not a redeemer of sins and so on. What are your thoughts about the more general question? If the evidence is so good that we really should believe it, 50% plus a feather, let's say, in a Bayesian way, then why don't Jews accept it?
Because the balance is so close. I mean, you've got Carl Sagan's famous extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. And the evidence in favor is not extraordinary. In some respects is damn close, and we'll get to that later probably in more detail, but it's not dispositive. And so on questions in which the empirical record is not dispositive, you're going to have lots of people disagreeing with other people. That's what happens with Bayesian arguments like that.
Why do you suppose, if this is all true, God set it up so that it's right there at 50%? Does that not suggest that he wants you to take a leap of faith? You have to do that. You either leap or you don't. And that's where volition comes in, maybe.
I find that very interesting and plausible hypothesis. The whole story about the growth of Christianity, you think about, but why did it happen in this backwater of the Middle East? I mean, Palestine in the first century was a backwater. Well, and you can also say, so I'm God and I want to have a way to intervene in the world, but in such a way that I don't have to keep doing this constantly. I can intervene and it's going to take. And you can think of all the ways in which that was kind of an ideal place for it to happen. Insofar as it spread very quickly, it could spread very quickly, partly because of the Roman Empire and partly because of its geographical location. And you can as easily say, oh, it's sort of the reason we have Christianity is because it had fortuitous, or I should say serendipitous, conditions that wouldn't apply to other religious traditions that never got the traction it got. You can go either way with it, but it's possible to look at the growth of Christianity as a very cleverly done concatenation of circumstances. And among those very interesting ones is that God did not present ironclad proof where everybody is forced into it, which in one way is analogous to the reason that God does not prevent evil from happening, because if you do that, you take all the agency out of being a human being. I am spitballing it here, Michael. I have not thought this through, but that's my reaction to your comments.
Yeah, interesting. Bart Ehrman and others have kind of tracked the growth of Christianity. It doesn't have to be anything miraculous, just like a 1% growth rate over, centuries can really, compound interest can really accumulate. Plus fecundity, they have bigger families, plus missionary conversions. Jews don't do that. Jews have a lot of babies, but they don't proselytize. It's not part of their religion. But Muslims do. So, how many? There's 2.1 billion Christians now, but there's 1.45 billion Muslims now. So, so some of it depends on historical circumstances, but also just demographic features like that.
Well, there's another thing that happened, which is that at about the same time Christianity was spreading, you had the destruction of the temple, and Judaism changed from a religion of the temple to a religion of the book. And there was also the mandate for Jewish boys to become literate that happened about that time. And you also had a big loss of Jews in the next 100 years, and there have been detailed analyses that tried to account for this, and there were wars, and there were a variety of things, but basically it just appears a whole lot of Jews boiled away. And my hypothesis is it got to be too hard to be a Jew. That if you had to become literate, the demand is one where you're simply going to lose a lot of people. And at the same time this was happening, you had this alternative come along in the form of Christianity, which was way easier to buy into. And I don't know that Christianity got a big boost from that, but we certainly know that the Jews took a big hit in terms of numbers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So back to how Jews think about the Messiah. I'm just reading something I wrote. Who did Jesus and his followers think he was? In Matthew 16:15-16, Jesus asked his disciples, "Who do men say that I am?" And they respond, "Thou art the Christ." Christos is Greek for Messiah, from Messiah, Hebrew for Messiah. Different spellings here. To many early Christians, the Hebrew Bible spoke to them of a returning Messiah, like in Jeremiah. "Behold, the days come, saith the Lord, that I will raise unto David a righteous branch, and a king shall reign and prosper, and shall execute judgment and justice in the earth." Such prophecies must have been especially reassuring to a people under the yoke, as Christianity's founding father Paul told the Colossians, "In whom we have redemption through his blood, even the forgiveness of sins." To the Hebrews, Paul said, "Neither by the blood of goats and calves, but by his own blood he entered at once into the holy place, having obtained eternal redemption for us." Redemption was not only for individuals, but for all of Israel, as Luke notes. Concerning Jesus of Nazareth, which was a prophet mighty in deed and word before God and all people, and how the chief priests and our rulers delivered him up to be condemned to death and have crucified him, but we trusted that it had been he who should have redeemed Israel. But when I read that, I think those passages, it does seem more like a Jewish Ben Shapiro type interpretation of the Messiah. He's a political figure that's going to save Israel and save the Jews now, not in some future life, but in this world right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, that was a very widespread view, but I think I might have missed another point you were making with that.
Well, in other words, maybe it's a story of redemption and forgiveness and making the world better now. It's not like a resurrection happens so that our original sins and we get to live forever with God. It's more of a current, political, social movement.
And you're suggesting this may have been the way the early Christians looked at it?
Yeah.
Well,
yeah. Well, you have the C.S. Lewis, argument. He was a liar, lunatic, or the Lord. Okay, maybe there's a fourth option. He was a evangelical political leader, a social leader, and he was trying to effect social change in his own time and something like that.
Well, that's definitely what the revisionists have glommed onto, Ehrman among others, and that the eventual interpretation of him as a son of God was a late invention. And when I refer to the revisionists, by the way, I'm not going to try to be more specific than that. There are several different schools of revisionism. The problem I have with that, and I'm not a biblical scholar, so I'm not in a position to defend this against a biblical scholar, but as I read the letters of Paul, the ones that are undisputed, it sure looks to me as if he is, we know for a fact that he was writing at least by the 50s, if not earlier. And he was preaching a pretty well-developed Christology in those letters. And I know that the revisionists dispute that. I know that the revisionists say, no, his language can be interpreted otherwise. I find it hard to interpret otherwise. And I also pay a special attention to Paul saying that he spent 13 days or something like that in Jerusalem with Peter and James. I guess this was the second one. This just a year or two after the crucifixion, and that, as one biblical scholar says, it's hard to believe they spent all of that time talking about the weather, and Peter's and Paul certainly seems to associate himself with the message that was being given by the disciples in Jerusalem. And that was that Christ was risen from the dead, which is not a secular leader, in any important sense of that term. So this is a case of things I had to do throughout the book. Then I say so explicitly. If you are going to take religion seriously, you are going to have to decide what you think about a variety of difficult problems that you do not have the option of mastering. I cannot become a theoretical physicist who can talk independently about the Big Bang. I don't have the option of becoming a biblical scholar that can balance the incredibly voluminous writings that have piled up over the centuries. But looking at the parsimonious interpretation of the New Testament, I say they were talking about this guy as the Son of God early on.
Mm-hmm.
That's when I was talking earlier about the probabilistic beliefs. This one is more than 50% in the feather. I'm further along the continuum on that one.
Okay, back to the problem of language. What would that mean, the Son of God? That God came into physical form as a human?
Well, here I'm going to turn away from the established theologians and invoke Reverend Lowell McConnell, who was a Presbyterian pastor in Newton, Iowa, when I was a boy and my parents were taking me to church. And I took the confirmation classes and was confirmed as a member of the Protestant church at that time. But anyway, Reverend McConnell, who, by the way, was no dummy. He was a graduate of the Union Theological Seminary and a smart guy and a well-read guy. But one of the things he said to me when I must have been 11 years old just stuck in my mind forever after. He said to us, suppose you take a jar down to the ocean and you fill the jar with seawater. Is the jar the ocean? And we all said no. And he said, well, it could be the same with Jesus. He is as much God as you can get into the human jar.
Mm.
And I really like that. And I like that in two senses. One is if you move along the continuum of saying that Jesus of Nazareth had a very unusual relationship with God, amounting to some kind of Son of God. But suppose you see Jesus of Nazareth as living a human life that was as godlike as it is given humans to be. You can believe that without confronting a more physical interpretation of the Son of God. And I know that Catherine, I think, is persuaded of it in that sense. She, in her much more profound experiences than I've had, sees his life and teachings as being extremely unusual, extremely informative, not just in a technical sense of the parables are really smart, but in a spiritual sense of this is how humans at their very best can be.
So what does it mean to say that humans were created in God's image? Again, we have that language problem.
I think that's pernicious. I think that
You do? Why?
I think that contributes to the anthropomorphizing of
I see.
God.
Yes. Yeah.
Big
Yeah.
big time, big time.
Yeah.
And if I could figure out a way not to do it without being excessively politically correct, I would not use he to refer to God. I think that's
Yeah. Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
I mean that's inappropriate.
Right. Well, but with the Trinity again, Father, Son, and Holy Ghost, you have the problem of identity. Aristotle's A is A. How can a God become human and vice versa, and the Holy Spirit and all that stuff? And then, Jesus died, or he was sacrificed to save us from God, who is Jesus. I mean, it just gets so confusing. He sacrificed himself to save us from himself.
Yeah, I am. I don't get the Trinity, and even after reading C.S. Lewis, who talks about it and more has it make more sense than others. The belief in the Trinity is not part of my eccentric Christianity.
You call it eccentric?
Oh, sure. It's very eccentric. However, having said that, I go back to Polkinghorne again. He says a lot of this is heuristics. We're trying to express things that are inexpressible, and you do the best you can with the language available to you, but we've got to allow ourselves a certain amount of latitude in interpreting these things. And there are certain ways of looking at the teachings of Jesus and of his mission that make it, if you want to put it this way, convenient to split it into three parts. And now I'm really out of my depth, but that's my impression as I think of people who I know, who I respect, devout Christians who do think it makes sense.
Well, yeah, you get into some of these theologians like Tillich that, says, God is the ground of all being. What does that mean? I don't even know what you're talking about. Right? I mean, again, the language problem. I'll just tell you what I think, my interpretation of Jesus is that, I'll just read from the Heavens on Earth here. Recall that Jesus suggested to his followers that redemption was coming, that the kingdom has come upon you, Luke 11:20, and especially in Luke 17:20-21, where Jesus seems to infer that heaven is a state of mind. Here's Jesus. And when he was demanded of the Pharisees when the kingdom of God should come, he answered them and said, the kingdom of God cometh not with observation, neither shall they say, lo here or lo there, for behold, the kingdom of God is within you. And then, according to the Interpreter's Bible, some scholars contend that a better translation for within should be in the midst of you. But they then add, within corresponds to the normal Greek use of the word, and this translation makes Jesus declare that God's rule is a new spiritual principle already operative in the lives of men. In this sense, the saying can be compared with the words of Paul in Romans 14:17. For the kingdom of God does not mean food and drink, but righteousness and peace and joy in the Holy Spirit. Further, they note that in the midst of is a translation that removes the saying from its exceptional category among the kingdom references in the Gospels. And then I conclude this. So perhaps this explains the tantalizing passage in Matthew 16:28, in which Jesus told his disciples, verily I say unto you, there be some standing here which shall not taste of death till they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. So, of course, atheists trot that out. They go, see, he's still not come. Where's he been? Right? But maybe that's not what he meant. Maybe he meant we have to create heavens on earth here, now. We have to make, Israel better, our lives, our tribes, whatever.
I've got to interject something here.
Yeah.
I was part of a book club that Pete Whiter put together. Pete is social political commentator, was a speechwriter for Bush, among other things. And this book club includes some really impressive Christians, some big deal Christians. But it also includes Yuval Levin, who runs the department at AEI that I am part of. He's my boss in that sense. And do you know Yuval?
I don't know him personally, but yeah.
Well, he's a brilliant guy.
And
and he's a Jew, but he was part of the book club all along and read all the other books. And as Pete said, Yuval knows way more about Christianity than we do. And as I listened to you, Michael, I'm saying, Michael knows way more about Christianity than I do. I'm very impressed.
Well, thanks. Well, I went to Pepperdine. I took all those courses, so maybe that college education went to some good, even though I'm not a believer now. Although I would say I agree with you on the word agnostic, as Huxley meant it, not knowable in some empirical scientific sense. And I'm certainly not a strong atheist where I know there's no God. Maybe weak atheist or just skeptic. I just don't believe. But I'm willing to consider, new evidence. Okay, so let's...
Well, and you clearly you clearly haven't sort of tried to shove things aside. You've confronted them. I will say you just expressed with the scripture about within you a very central Quaker belief that there is God of that in everyone, which does not mean there is some good in everyone. It means more literally that that God is omnipresent in that sense, including within us. And the scripture as you were reading that scripture, I'm saying to myself, that's where George Fox got that, I bet. George Fox being one of the leading Quaker theologians. And if you were wondering why I bring Quakerism into this, if you're watching and you haven't read the book, Catherine, my wife, who started me off in this whole thing when she started looking for religion, or she was uncomfortable being in mainline Protestant churches because she could not in good faith recite the Nicene Creed or the Apostles' Creed along with the rest of the congregation. And if you become a Quaker, there's no need to do that because Quakers are not at all doctrinaire in that sense. And so it's through her that I have gotten to take Quakerism very seriously, too. It's a very impressive religion.
Yeah, I wonder if that explains why they were one of the first slavery abolitionists. Bringing about social, political change now.
They certainly were very early in that. And I guess that my first reaction is that all good Christians should have been very early abolitionists.
Right, you would think so, but they weren't. In fact, a lot of them defended slavery.
Yes. Well, there's another aspect, though, of Quakerism, which is very interesting. Quakers were among the first, I think they were the first, to establish set prices in stores, to have stores, because if one of the things about Quakerism that they are strict about is you do not lie. Lying is absolutely forbidden. And if you offer someone a price that you yourself think is too high, you are lying to your customer. And so they had set prices, and lo and behold, people liked set prices, and a lot of Quakers got they not only were trying to do good, they did real well in lots of cases in commerce.
Nice. Well, there's your argument for the foundation, Judeo-Christian worldview foundation of capitalism and democracy, which has a case could be made. I mean, that's one of Ayaan Hirsi Ali's first arguments she made of her conversion, because she's concerned about Islamism. But now she is saying that she actually believes it, not just a social, cultural Christian, but an actual believing Christian.
Oh, you haven't read her? Is the book out yet?
No, it's not out yet. I think it comes out in 2026 some point. I haven't seen any galleys or anything like that. But she participated in that debate with me for the Free Press in Austin. Does the West need a religious revival? So it was her and Ross Douthat against me and who's the conservative comedian with the most popular podcast? Adam Carolla, which is really funny. He made the night. He's so funny. But their argument was purely cultural, that the foundation of capitalism and democracy and the rule of law and true liberalism or classical liberalism is the Judeo-Christian worldview. That doesn't make it right, but it is a historical case they were making.
Yeah, well, this is one where, but my book is not at all about that.
Yeah,
I've kind of believed that for a long time. So I'm actually trying to figure out truth values.
Yes, yeah,
Christianity.
yeah. That's why I liked your book. Yeah, yeah. All right. Immanuel Kant's famous line: "Two things fill the mind with ever new and increasing admiration and awe: the more often and the more steadily we reflect on them, the starry heavens above me and the moral law within me." All right, let's start there. What of those two categories, what nudges you over that 50% line?
Well, the first one is the starry heavens above me, and that's an oblique reference to my reaction when I got into the anthropic principle and the Big Bang. And this is a case of reading a thin little book, even thinner than my book, and coming to the end of it and say, I can't believe that I'm thinking what I'm thinking, because what I was thinking at the end of that book is that the only plausible explanation for the universe we live in is that it's intentional, that I'm not sure what the ultimate intention is, and I can't describe the intender in any detail, but its intention is more plausible than my other two alternatives.
Was that Martin Rees's just 6 numbers?
Yeah, it's just 6 numbers.
Yeah.
And for those who are watching that are not familiar with the anthropic principle, this is not the same as intelligent design. We're not talking about evolution couldn't have produced the eye or something like that. We're talking about the physics of the first fractions of a second of the Big Bang, when a whole wide variety of parameters that do not have any theoretical basis had to be set exactly right, or you would have never had hydrogen convert to helium, you would never have had stars and never had planets, and life could not have existed. And the anthropic principle is not really a subject of argument within physics. The reality of the unlikelihood of this universe is not contested. The thing that physicists did, some of them, was decide that there were millions of universes. The multiverse theory, which is partly a product of string theory and so forth. Because if you don't believe that, and I look into the starry sky above and say, do I think there are a million of these? No, I don't. I think this universe is it. The alternative, if you don't believe that, is one of two things. Either we are the beneficiaries of 1 in trillions chance, not 1 in millions, but 1 in trillions. And that number was computed by a Nobel laureate, Rodney Penrose. Do I have that right? Roger Penrose. Or you believe that an intention was behind it. And there's a Canadian philosopher who has the analogy of, suppose you're facing a firing squad of 100 expert marksmen, and they all fire and miss, and you're alive. So in one sense, you can say, well, there's no point. I'm alive. So what difference does it make why they miss? But it's okay to be curious. And to me, being curious about a 1 in a trillion chance is okay too. And given the choice between winning the lottery 3 times in a row or my belief in that or belief in intention, I find an intentional universe more plausible. So that's the first big thing, that sentence you had from Kant. The second big thing is the moral law. And we are back with C.S. Lewis. I tell you, Michael, of all the things that I find myself pulling against, it's my acceptance of the idea of moral law. And the reason is I think I'm too big a fan of evolutionary biology to get rid of it altogether.
Get rid of what? Evolutionary theory?
Get to say that evolution could not have produced a phenomenon of human beings, which is fairly common, widespread altruism that's not reciprocal altruism. It's also not kin selection, whereby altruism toward blood relations can actually contribute to reproductive fitness. No, I'm willing to believe, and I accept fully, that evolutionary biology has explained those. This other kind of altruism that is not rare in human life, but quite common, where people do good or try to do good for other people, and not only when there's no benefit in it for them, but a lot of times putting themselves in danger. To me, that is such a downside in terms of reproductive fitness that it does demand some kind of explanation. And it's C.S. Lewis again who provides, that's the way he spends the first 5 chapters of Mere Christianity. Again, to listeners who don't know as much about Christianity as Michael Shermer, which means 99% of you, the Mere Christianity is this slim book by C.S. Lewis that I read and was gobsmacked, as it were. That's actually more accurate.
That's a great term. That's where that word comes from.
Yeah. It's a book which will at least convince you of one thing, that some smart people do believe that stuff anymore because C.S. Lewis, really impressive intellect. Mm-hmm. And he makes the case that if God were trying to reveal himself to us, he could not do so in a whole bunch of different ways because that would be contradictory to being God. And what he could do was to instill in human beings an impulse toward what God wanted us to be, and what, to put it another way, if God is love, to instill an impulse to recognize that aspect of God. And this is what's behind the altruistic impulse, and in a broader sense is behind a moral law that is essentially divine. And I am persuaded against my will, in some sense.
What do you mean?
There are a variety of things as I wrote this book that were against my will. I have a chapter in there on challenges to materialism, in which I'm saying, I don't care how many articles the Skeptical Inquirer or the Skeptic puts out debunking a lot of psychic phenomena. There are other things going on that get real close to Carl Sagan's requirement for extraordinary proof of extraordinary claims. And so in one sense, I am challenging materialism, which says consciousness exists exclusively in the brain. The brain stops, consciousness stops, no afterlife, can't be. And I'm saying, no, there's evidence that that's not true. There's a lot of silly evidence, but there's a core that needs to be taken seriously. And I found myself reluctant to go into print with that. And one reason is because materialism for such a long time made such perfect sense to me. Of course, consciousness doesn't exist independently of the brain. And there's a second reason. I am delighted with this conversation, Michael, because it doesn't sound as if you're too disappointed in me. Okay. and I respect your opinion. I've admired what you've done. And I was saying there are a lot of people I admire, and I'm going to write this. And they say, well, Murray just may be, he's 82 after all, and he just may be losing it. Or if they don't believe that, just say, oh, you can't explain it. Sometimes people just go off the rails. And
the line that popped into my head when I saw your book was cramming for the final.
I love it.
Yeah. Okay. Let's come back to the latter part, because I want to talk about terminal lucidity in a minute. But back to the moral law. So, is it your sense that evolutionary psychology explains, through kin selection and reciprocal altruism, that people are nice to one another, they're pro-social, they're cooperative, not always, of course, but because there's kind of a game theory logic to it, and that your genes do get into the next generation more likely if you are cooperative with somebody who is nice to you. They are going to help you when times are bad for you in kind of a calculated way. I think what you're saying is that love, or maybe agape, the Christian word, or there's something
agape's
bigger.
Better.
Agape's bigger than just a game theoretic logic to it. Is it your sense that God gave us, and maybe not chimps and gorillas or whatever who have pre-moral sentiments like that, something else? Is it like it's part of mind that's not in the brain? There's no module for this?
Well, first, I want to go back to how I got started on this whole thing to begin with Catherine, because it relates to agape and to love and to the concept of God as love. Catherine had our first child together in 1985. And after a couple of months, she came to me and she was saying, I love Anna so much that I'm losing a sense of where she stops and I begin. And then she came up with a line, another of her lines that is so good that Michael Gerson and David Brooks have both quoted it publicly. And her line was, I love Anna far more than evolution requires. So she was acknowledging that women are evolutionarily hardwired to love babies. And when I tried to press her on this, and I pointed that out to her, and when what did she mean by far more than evolution required? She said, I feel as if I'm a conduit for a larger love. And that larger love, she began to identify with a mysterious thing that she might as well call God. And that's what set her out on this whole thing. And it's watching her and her subsequent growth and development of that and the ultimate mysteriousness of God as love that slowly dragged me in to all of this. So, believing in the moral law, when I say I was fighting against it, I am required to believe something, not required. Given Catherine's logic, I am drawn toward a concept of God as love, and that is a very profound step. I don't know. I'm losing the ability to articulate what I'm
Maybe
meaning
that's what
here.
made in God's image means, that element of love. You must know Bob Wright, Robert Wright, the journalist, and he wrote.
I don't know him personally,
Okay,
but I
yeah.
know of him.
His book Non-Zero, he kind of makes a move toward the end of that. The whole book is on game theory, logic of cooperation and playing non-zero win-win games. And that, but at the end, there's a move he makes, like there's something else with love that seems not to be a derivative of the game theoretic logic. But here's how I think about it. That there's one more move I make in which I apply Bob Triver's theory of deception and self-deception. That is to say, we can detect when people are lying, not that great, but if you spend a lot of time with somebody, they give off cues and you don't really trust them, or you do trust them. And part of that is that the evolutionary arms race is that if you believe the lie you're telling, self-deception, your body's not going to give off subtle cues, facial expressions, or whatever, that you're manipulating them, or you're being Machiavellian, or you're lying, or whatever. So if you believe it yourself, then you're going to actually, really feel it and believe it. You're going to really sell whatever. Now, the positive side of that, then I tie this into Aristotelian virtue ethics, is that if you actually believe it, you feel good about helping a friend, or let's say the tipping problem in evolutionary psychology. Like, why would you tip somebody at a restaurant you're never going to go to? You're traveling on the road. You just drop into some restaurant. You leave a tip. You don't have to. You'll never see this person again. But you yourself want to feel like you're a good person. And you do feel good about doing that. And that you become a virtuous person by being virtuous. right? And then you inculcate.
Well, that's Aristotelian.
Yeah, exactly.
Very Aristotelian.
Yeah, exactly. So my argument that's as good as we materialists can get in terms of a transcendent feeling of being good moral person, is that I actually feel it. I like you, and when I do something nice for you, I feel good about it, and I'm not doing some game theoretic calculation like, so Charles is going to be nice to me next year. If I blurb his book, he'll blurb my book, and I've just got this calculation going. No, I feel good about it, right? That's the kind of deeper emotion. Maybe that's what love is, something like that.
Why do you feel good about it, though?
Well, so that's the question, because I don't want to be just a calculating manipulator. I want to actually feel like I'm a good moral person.
But why?
I mean, that's just the way it is, because that's my psychology. Maybe that's the moral law.
That's exactly what C.S. Lewis would say, and Francis Collins in his book, The Language of God, makes the same point. So that why does that make you feel good about yourself? Instead, why not feel good when you don't tip? Because these suckers, they tip. It's not as if they're ever going to see this person again. Why the hell are they leaving a tip? And what C.S. Lewis and Francis Collins would both say is, why doesn't that logic prevail? Why is rape bad if you're a male and you enjoy rape, and why and there's no hell, and why not? Well, and if you say, but that's wrong to rape. Well, why is it wrong? And you push back. If you push back repeatedly, sooner or later you are driven, I think, or at least I am driven, to saying it's just wrong. As a human being, it's wrong. And then the question is, why do you say that? Well, you can continue to say, well, I don't have to explain it. And to me, there are all sorts of persuasive reasons that more people should be completely self-centered in their calculation of pleasure and pain, who aren't. And I am rehearsing for you right here all the reasons that I doubt the moral law. But then when I get to talking like I've just been talking the last few minutes, I'm saying, damn it, it's true. That feeling is in there and it is embedded. And I'm going to go with C.S. Lewis's argument, and in the process, reveal myself for the philosophical sucker that I probably am.
Oh, I wouldn't say that. But again, there's a move there and then a miracle happens, or then something special or supernatural, or, that God puts that thing in us that he didn't in other species, something like that. Let's go back to a bottom-up explanation. So Steve Pinker calls this the principle of interchangeable perspectives. I'll quote Abraham Lincoln: "As I would not be a slave, so I would not be a master." And then another time, in giving freedom to the slave, we assure freedom to the free. So there, you were just kind of putting ourselves in somebody else's shoes. Well, how would I feel about that? And you would say, well, why would you care about that? Well, because I don't want to be a slave, and something like that. So here's how Pinker describes this. He makes an equation of this with Platonic truths. On this analogy, we are born with a rudimentary concept of number, but as soon as we build on it with formal mathematical reasoning, the nature of mathematical reality forces us to discover some truths, but not others. No one who understands the concept of 2, the concept of 4, and the concept of addition can come to any conclusion but that 2 + 2 = 4. Perhaps we're born with a rudimentary moral sense, and as soon as we build on it with moral reasoning, the nature of moral reality forces us to some conclusions, but not others. If I appeal to you to do anything that affects me, get off my foot or tell me the time or not run me over with your car, I can't do it in a way that privileges my interests over yours, say retaining my right to run you over with my car, if I want you to take me seriously. Unless I'm a galactic overlord, I have to state my case in a way that would force me to treat you in kind. I can't act as if my interests are special just because I'm me and you're not, any more than I can persuade you that the spot I'm standing on is a special place in the universe just because I happen to be standing on it. Okay. So then the next move there is that then you feel good about it, because that leads to the survival of the species, prosociality of our group succeeding, and so on. And so anyway, that's my answer to that.
Well, I can't resist putting in a little codicil there.
Yeah.
Steve Pinker's logic in that case mirrors Robert Nozick's logic in favor of a minimal state.
Yes.
Remember?
Yes.
Remember how you have to imagine an ideal state that other people would be willing to accept, and they wouldn't simply migrate out of your utopia.
Yeah,
and sooner or later you come in. Okay.
Yeah.
So that is a great analogy. And I must say that Steve, as usual, has come up with something which also could be juxtaposed with the way that C.S. Lewis opens Mere Christianity by quoting conversations you hear when people are quarreling. Why did you do that? He didn't do anything to you. It's not fair, etc. And Steve is coming up with a way in which that could happen. I then, if I were as powerful as an arguer as Steve is, I would say, okay, what was that thing he said in the beginning about a primitive moral sense, a granular, a grain of moral sense? Where did that come from? And that it's not necessarily true that these building blocks are going to lead it to this structure. But I won't try to go any further in arguing with Steve Pinker than that. I will just say, no, I'm going to go with C.S. Lewis.
Well, but there's also a kind of an evolutionary logic to violence and aggression and having a reputation of being a badass, so you don't get exploited, right? Because there are free riders and freeloaders. And so this is Christopher Baum's argument for the evolution of morality, is that humans are both. We have better angels and inner demons, and that there's a logic behind trying to exploit other people, but they know that you're trying to do this, and you know that they may want to try to exploit you. So we have to set up some kind of social system in which the rules are enforced. Here's the rules, and we're going to enforce them. And then he's got a great section in his book, The Origin of Morality, I think it is, Moral Origins, of these hunter-gatherer groups and how they deal with these bullies and free riders that disrupt the group. Ultimately, they employ capital punishment. They take the guy out for a hunt with the other guys, and they come back without him. and so, but the larger argument is that we're kind of self-domesticated. That we do something that no other primates do. The analogy is if you had 300 chimpanzees in a metal tube at 30,000 feet, and the person's coming down the aisle with the drink cart and the food cart, they're not going to act like us. They're going to be just utter chaos. Humans do something that no one else does. This is maybe your moral law, is that we're able to control our inner impulses, our inner demons.
Well, I would give an example in the book of something else that has stuck with me. I've once had a situation in which I was put in a situation of helping somebody who was in danger, and it put me in danger as well. And I will never forget the imperiousness of this voice that says, you have to stop and do such and such. You can come up with the other rationales, and I list some of those rationales, but man, what was in my head felt like some very powerful force outside myself saying, you have no choice, you must. So there's that too. That's as close as I've come to a miracle, but...
You are unnecessarily nice.
Yes.
More than evolution requires.
Way more than evolution. No, in ways that put passing my genes at great risk.
But the example you give in the book, you didn't say what you did, but you did something bad, and you were glad to feel guilty and crappy about it, and you didn't really want to be forgiven for that. That itself is a kind of an evolutionary logic behind it. You should feel bad if you harm other people and disrupt groups and so on. That's an evolved sense of self-control.
Yeah, and here is where I changed my mind. over the course of the last 30 years, because I remember feeling that way in the mid-1990s. And with a lot of things, this evolution has been very slow. So I never had a moment at which I said to myself, God will forgive our sins if we repent. Never did that. However, I think back at feeling that I deserve to suffer, and I deserve not to be forgiven, and I should feel bad. And I think how silly I was being. That who am I to try to tell God whether I should be forgiven or not? That the only thing I can do is to be truly repentant, not fake repentant, hoping to be to fool God into forgiving me. All I can do is be fully repentant, and if God forgives me, that is grace. And without knowing it, I have come to believe in God's grace. And that's a big deal, even if the afterlife isn't, you know?
Certainly it is, but what about the person you harmed? Shouldn't you ask them for forgiveness and say you're sorry?
If that were possible, I certainly should.
Okay.
It's not, yeah.
Not possible at this point, yeah, okay. But surely you wouldn't apply that to, I don't know, Jeffrey Dahmer, Ted Bundy, receives Jesus the day before they're executed and they get to go to heaven?
That's makes me think of my kind of, it's not a belief, but it's something I like to play with. And that is that what happens when we die is not heaven and hell that God consigns us to. That what happens when we die, and this is actually consistent with some of the near-death experience reports, that we have perfect moral clarity about our lives. And the perfect moral clarity, as I have this idea in my head, is that we take into account all the environmental causes of something we did that was bad, so that if there are legitimate excuses for our behavior, that comes into the picture, but we get perfect moral clarity about bad things we did that were our choice. And if you did a modest number of those things, you will feel that guilt, and maybe that's purgatory. And if you did a lot of those things and and you never felt repentance, no, your burden of guilt will be so painful that it amounts to hell. I do not present that as a belief. I just think that, going to your question, Jeffrey Dahmer, suppose the day he died, before he died, he wasn't worried about going to hell. He just said, "Oh my God, what have I done?" And felt that utterly. Yeah, I don't think God withholds grace from a situation like that, except it better be really, really authentic if you're going to.
Do you have a sense of what, I mean, can you even think about it, what the afterlife would actually be like? What does it mean to live forever at God's side, or what heaven might be like, or anything like that? Or is that too terrestrial concept?
Yeah, that's beyond me. I mean, if you go with the near-death experiences, they're kind of all over the lot. You've got a wide variety. I don't expect that eternity. I don't expect. Let me put it this way: I'm quite confident that it will eventually be some resemblance to the Buddhist idea of merging with the universe. But it who knows? But there could very well be a transition that we don't instantly blend with the universe or have a sense of euphoria or whatever. But beats the hell out of me, and that's the only thing one can say about the contours of an afterlife.
Deepak Chopra tells me I'm just going to go back to where I was before I was born, just back to the consciousness of the universe. That consciousness, he calls it the ground of all being.
Who does?
Deepak Chopra. He's a Buddhist. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and we haven't even mentioned Ian Stevenson and the reincarnation stuff too. So
Yeah, so let's talk about, well, the most interesting of those three, reincarnation, near-death experiences, and terminal lucidity, is the latter one, because that's fairly new phenomenon. I hadn't even heard of it when I wrote Heavens on Earth in 2018, and I've only heard it come up just in the last 2 years. All of a sudden, everyone's talking about it. Go ahead and tell us what that is and why you're.
Well, it's when people who have clinically diagnosed mental diseases that, as far as we know now, prevent the brain from having organized thought. Dementia is the most common. Meningitis, some kinds of strokes, a variety of them. So I'm talking about situations in which a person has not recognized his or her spouse for years, doesn't recognize children. And for that matter, my mother had dementia, and so their eyes don't focus. There's just no sense of them being there. And a day or two before death, they're back in some cases. And by back, I mean it can be nonverbal, but oftentimes it is verbal. They recognize the spouse, they recognize the kids, they have memories, they have their old personalities too, personality characteristics. It can last from 5 minutes to a couple of hours, then complete relapse, and death follows shortly thereafter. This, even though it's only recently that it's penetrated into the wider world, people in hospices and palliative care facilities, it happens often enough that chances are, if you talk to somebody who's worked for several years in a hospice, they'll have an example to tell about it. And in the 19th century, when clinicians tended to describe things in much greater detail than they do now, there were about 80 cases of physicians who wrote these things up in great detail. So that is the thing which I say, you have a physiological state that, according to neuroscience, means this should be impossible. It is not possible they've suddenly been healed. And so this, to me, is significant evidence, good evidence, for consciousness existing independently of the brain. And then, as we mentioned at the beginning of the program, there's been a very interesting article that came out in Psychology Today, which doesn't force me to recant the section on terminal lucidity. I would tweak the wording in some of them, and I would acknowledge some of the alternatives that are being explored. None of these are any more definitive than my position than that consciousness exists independently of the brain. But they're suggestive. Basically, the argument is saying we are much more ignorant about neuroscience than you're giving us credit for. We know far less, and there's far more possibilities than you have considered.
Yeah. Well, I had Michael Egnor on the show. He wrote that The Timeless Mind, in which he wrote a lot about terminal lucidity. And I had Christoph Koch, the great neuroscientist, on with him. He's a materialist. And Christoph said, that is a really puzzling one, I have to say. Because we don't know where memory is stored. If the memories are coming back online, where did they go in the interim with Alzheimer's? And the neurons are gone, the plaques and tangles and the diseased brain.
Well, that's what led me to be so confident in the text, that and why I will only have to soften my language. I won't have to recant it. However, there's one thing that's worth pointing out about materialists, of whom I was a practicing member in good standing for so long. It seemed so obvious to me that, of course, consciousness exists only in the brain. And this is the problem of being too caught up in the Enlightenment. For thousands of years, human beings almost universally believed the opposite, that human beings have souls. That's independent of the body. So it's not as if there was never an alternative way of looking at this.
So you call yourself a dualist now?
A what?
A dualist. Like
a dualist.
A Cartesian dualist.
Oh, I hadn't heard that. I'm exposing my ignorance here. No, I hadn't realized that. That was the
mind, corporeal,
mind, body,
mind and body. Yeah,
yeah.
That was what everybody believed before the modern time. Okay, I'll read you just a couple paragraphs from this neuroscientist who just posted this article. I don't think it was the Psych Today. I think it was his own Substack. I'll send it to you. No one has actually studied. No, by the way, he's not treating it as the soul or the mind floating off somewhere. He just wants to know, as a neuroscientist, maybe we can learn something from this about memories and how we can help these patients with Alzheimer's and dementia, because maybe we can do something to bring it back on before they die. Anyway, he says no one has actually studied the neuroscience of terminal lucidity while it is happening. No EEG readings, no brain imaging, no blood work during episodes. So any explanation is necessarily speculative, but we can make some educated guesses based on known phenomena. Dying patients often develop brain swelling from multiple causes: electrolyte imbalances, low blood protein, kidney or liver failure, inflammation, damage to the blood-brain barrier. This swelling compresses brain tissue and reduces blood flow, starving neurons of oxygen and glucose. The result is the familiar progression of terminal delirium, confusion, then sleepiness, then coma, then death. But in their final days, many patients stop eating and drinking entirely. The resulting dehydration could reduce brain swelling, allowing blood flow to increase and temporarily restoring some cognitive function, a brief window of lucidity before the dying process continues. It's a simple mechanism. Lower intracranial pressure means better perfusion, means more oxygen and glucose in the brain, which in turn means more functional neurons. This is testable. If swelling reduction is the mechanism, we'd expect terminal lucidity to correlate with dehydration and potentially with certain causes of death more than others. Anyway, this goes on and on. I'll just send it to you. But basically he's saying this is a super interesting phenomenon. It seems to be real. Let's see if we can figure out what's going on so we can help these patients. Nothing in there about the soul or the mind or anything like that.
I wonder if that's two separate things. It doesn't quite sound like the one I read this morning. It might be.
It's a different article. Yeah. So he's suggesting with informed consent from patients and family, video records, supposed lucid episodes in people with advanced dementia or terminal conditions. In other words, you could just set up a camera or have them studying it if it happens. The problem is what percentage of people that are in this condition have terminal lucidity? I mean, you have lots of...
Well, we actually, a prospective study of incidents has been done by the same man who wrote Threshold, which is the one book that I know of that is out. And by the way, it's a good book. You will enjoy reading it. It's by a serious person who knows his stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And my memory is that they had a prospective study, but that doesn't let you. And the incidence was not high enough that trying to record it in real time is very plausible. Because it comes unpredictably, except that it's close to death.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's like I think it's Sam Parnia has that. Parnia.
No, that's not the author, but a guy. It's a Hungarian name.
Well, I'm thinking about a different thing. So with the near-death experiences where people have out of body and they float up to the ceiling, if you put something up there on a shelf facing up, maybe they can see it and report back later. So they've set that up in several ERs and ORs, and nothing's come through.
Yeah. So finally, somebody calculated the odds against. Because you take the proportion of out-of-body experiences, you take the proportion that are going to see it, and so it was a really ingenious idea, but it was a kind of low probability event.
Probably, but at least there's an attempt to get at it.
Yeah.
I mean, what this neuroscientist is basically saying is, to me, the gross neglect is that terminal lucidity, having been ignored for so long, reflects a deeper issue. Death and dying are drastically understudied across medicine and neuroscience. So he's saying, this is something real and interesting. Let's get at it. So I think again, we're in one of those anomalous experiences that people have, and there are lots of them. What do you make of that? Maybe we don't. Okay, so you can go in one direction, like this supports one worldview, or you can just say, I don't know. Let's just study it some more.
You know what I would like to see Michael, now maybe you've done this and I just am not aware of it. I would like to see more of the skeptics steel man their examples. I read way too many articles which take the easy cases, Geller bending spoons, or take NDE, near-death experience cases that are susceptible to some of the physiological explanations have been advanced. I say, no, take the subsets that are the most problematic for you, the subsets of cases in near-death experiences where you have cardiac arrest, you have no respiration, have no brain waves, and you also have something that the guy or gal reports that happened in the operating room or the emergency ward or wherever that can be verified. Take on those and say why those are illegitimate. And in the case of near-death experiences, take ones which have multiple witnesses and take ones where the physiological medical information about the disease is irreproachable and you have a medical personnel present at the time who provides a clinical description and refute those. And that seems, going back to Henry James and his famous Black Crow, take on the Black Crows, the potential Black Crows, focus on them.
Yes, well, I would say not refute, or just try to explain. A lot of times we can't refute it or even fully explain it. A lot of them are one-off events, by definition, anomalous events. I wasn't there. I don't know what you saw, but okay, let's think about what it could be. But ultimately, I wasn't there. There was no video recorder, right? Yeah. So, back to your why question. At some point, let's talk epistemology for a second. Maybe you're just asking one too many questions. This is Thomas Nagel's idea. What's it like to be a bat? How the hell should I know? That's just one too many questions. It's like, can you use induction to prove induction works? Or can you use a scientific method to prove the scientific method works? That's one too many questions, Nagel says. We like to ask a lot of whys, but maybe there's a wall we hit. Like, what was there before time began? What's north of the North Pole? I mean, these become, how does something come from nothing? Well, what do you mean by nothing? Because if you really mean nothing, then there can't even be a God or a concept of a creator or even Platonic ideas or math. There can't be anything. So you can't mean nothing. And even the word no thing implies there's a thing. So we're back to the language problem.
Yeah. Well, may I just say, I think you have the ideal attitude toward this set of phenomena that puzzle all of us, and that dogmatism is inappropriate, I think, in all cases. Maybe there are small things in our own life where we will be pretty dogmatic because we just simply do not have any doubt. But for 99.99% of the things we've talked about today, they are things to be turned over and mulled over. And insofar as you can bring more evidence to bear on them, you bring more evidence to bear on them. And that's the attitude you convey, and I admire it.
Oh, thank you. Well, as a historian of science, I can't help but think the way people thought in Newton's day versus today, or say Galileo and Newton, scientific revolution, how they overturned so much of the medieval worldview. And yet, even since the 1890s, say, when physicists thought, well, that's pretty much it. We got it down to this sixth place after the decimal point, and then along comes Einstein and relativity, and then quantum physics, and now string theory, and on and on and on. Now I've just this James Webb Space Telescope, finding these galaxies that are like fully formed just after the Big Bang, like within a couple 100 million years, which is not possible based on how is this happening? I mean, there's just so much we don't know. I can't help but think, Charles, if you and I were cryonically frozen and brought back 500 years from now, we'd be going, oh, That's the hard problem of consciousness. Oh, they solved that one 200 years ago or whatever, right? Dark matter. We know what that is now. There's just so much we don't know. It's just good to it's okay to be open-minded. Okay. So, what else did I want to ask you about?
You realize you're pushing an 82-year-old man to the limits of his energy.
Yes, I know. No, let's wrap it up. I did want to ask you, just kind of reflecting on your life in politics and culture and sociology and social change and all that stuff at your age, looking back, having written these books about changing systems over the decades. Are we in a really unusual time now, or does it just feel like that? And the 60s and the Vietnam War and all that stuff is just as crazy, but it's in the distance. And now it's the availability heuristic and the recency effect, and it's not really different, or have things really changed?
I think that we are partly already in a completely terra incognita, but we will definitely be in just an unknown world within a matter of years. I'm talking about AI. I'm talking about what happens when we get gene editing. It's as if we have an overused cliche, a perfect storm of new stuff. And on top of all that, we have fundamentally different conditions of life from those that we evolved with. If nothing else, in that we live lives of reasonable security where we can more or less expect 70 or 80 years and we don't have to think about death and things like that. Lives in which, and I think the effects of this are still underestimated, lives in which we can effortlessly entertain ourselves 24/7. Which was never possible before. Entertaining yourself, you had to work at it, and now you don't. There are just so many things. I don't even want to get started on them. The things we are not equipped to handle through our evolved characteristics are just overwhelming right now. And that's it.
Yeah, the predictions you made in Coming Apart. The coming apart is going to get even more with AI and the cognitive elite using it more than the rest of us.
Everything points to increasing divergence in that regard. Everything points to greater problems for ordinary people to live lives where they can reach the age of 82 and be satisfied with who they've been and what they've done. It's an odd thing to say, but I'm kind of glad that I'm not going to live to have to deal with all of those things.
Oh, don't say that. Come on. You might make it to 100. I'm aiming for 100.
Okay.
and maybe, all of a sudden I'll see you on the other side. Maybe.
Yeah, we'll talk about it then.
Because we're friends, and maybe you can get me in.
I don't think I have a whole lot of clout, but I think I know some people who have clout. So
there you go. You see?
Yeah.
All right, Charles, let's say goodbye. Let's end it there. That's just a great conversation. Here it is again, taking religion seriously. I've seen you've got a lot of really good reviews. You've been doing a lot of shows in media. So that's great.
This has been just about the most fun conversation, extended conversation I've had on any topic for a long time.
Oh, gosh. Well, thank you. I appreciate that.